Hi, yeah, guys, what's up? I'm Ethan, your RealLife English fluency coach, and in today's lesson, we're taking a look at how to correctly pronounce celebrities' names. Now, recently we did a lesson on how to correctly pronounce brand names in English, and this is kind of a similar lesson because if you pronounce either one incorrectly, people probably won't understand you. Now, this has happened to me a lot with my students from all around the world, that they're talking about some different celebrity, and I can't tell who they're talking about until they actually write it down for me, and I can give them the correct pronunciation of that person's name. Now, you can actually probably think about this if there's some celebrity from your country that people from other countries might pronounce their name wrong. Like here in Barcelona, for example, if I were to say the actress Penelope Cruz, the same like that I would say in the United States, people might not understand who I'm referring to. Now, this is also really important because people's names is really the most important word for them in the entire universe. So you want to make sure that you're saying that correctly so you're not kind of creating some distance between you and that other person. Now, this happens to me a lot because my name is a little bit difficult in other languages. Like people will call me Eitan or Etan or Athan or anything like that, and actually it should be pronounced Ethan, Ethan. And our other fluency coach is often called Andra or Andrea, and let's see how she would actually say it.
My name is pronounced as Andrea. Andrea.
And another way that you can look at this is trying to think about how an American would pronounce your name. It would probably be quite a bit different than how you would say it in your native language, right? Now, this is going to be a really useful lesson to practice your pronunciation, to do a little bit of vocal training with some of the different sounds. And so before we jump in, I want to let you know that if you're new here, every single week we make lessons like this one so that you can understand fast-speaking natives, be understood by anyone, and connect to the world. Just like our fan Samane, who I'm not sure if I'm actually pronouncing that name correctly, who says that thanks to our lessons that he can understand and speak English like a native. And you can too. Join us by hitting that subscribe button and the bell below and you won't miss a single one of our new lessons. Alright, so now let's jump into the top 10 most difficult names for English learners to pronounce. And actually, you can get another 3 exclusively over on our Instagram after you finish this lesson. So after you watch this, be sure to head over to @reallife.english and check those out. Now, something really interesting about names in the United States is that almost all of us are descended from people from other countries. So you'll find a lot of surnames that originally come from other languages. However, even if you see a name that might seem like it is from your native language, you probably should still try to pronounce it like an American because normally that's how we will pronounce it. It kind of loses its original pronunciation. So that said, how would you pronounce this famous singer's name? Let's take a look at how some different learners might say this.
Rihanna.
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 Diana.
All right, so she would say her own name as Rihanna. Now, you'll find a lot of Americans that also mispronounce this by saying Rihanna. Now, the correct way is with that ah sound, but either way, you'll definitely be understood. Just make sure that you're not pronouncing the H and that you are saying the R as an American or a Brit would. So it's that R sound, not a tap R or a rolled R. Now, the difference with this, if you want to be sure, is that your tongue should be down when you're saying that R sound. So it's ra, ra, ra. See that my tongue isn't going behind my teeth at all as it would in some Latin languages. Moving on, this isn't a real person, but it's a super difficult name from the popular book series and movies Harry Potter. Now, how would you say her name? Let's take a look at how some different learners would actually say this incorrectly.
Hermione Granger.
Hermione Granger.
Hermione Granger.
Hermione Granger.
Hermione Granger.
Now, don't feel bad if you didn't say this correctly because it was difficult for me even before the movies came out and I heard tons of different people say this a different way. But now we tend to accept the way that it was pronounced in the movies. So this is pronounced as Hermione Granger. Hermione Granger. Now, in the last name, Granger, you should say that A as if it were like in the word rain. So it's A, not A. So it's not Granger, it's Granger.
I'm Hermione Granger.
And actually the most correct way that you can say this would probably be how they say it in the UK because, of course, this book takes place in the United Kingdom. So let's actually take a look at the way I would say it compared to how Andrea would say it. So I would say Hermione Granger and Andrea would say
Hermione Granger. Hermione Granger.
All right, so the really big difference there is with the R sound. So I say it as a strong R, and she actually says it as more of that soft British R. So next is definitely one of the most popular actors that we see all over the internet. And how would you pronounce his name? Now let's take a look at how some learners often mispronounce this one.
Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves.
So you should say it Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves. Now, the last name, a lot of people might see how long this is and think that it should actually be said as like Reeves or something like that, but it's just one syllable like the word leaves. Leaves, Reeves. So you can remember that and it'll help you pronounce that correctly. And hey, by the way, if this is difficult for you, if you find native pronunciation tricky, then we have a really fun way for you to master native pronunciation. And that is with our 3-part masterclass, which is 100% free. Now, you will be learning with the TV series Friends, which various academic studies show is one of the best series out there for learning English. So not only will you master pronunciation, but you'll also learn about the other 2 keys to being able to understand fast-speaking natives, and that is vocabulary and cultural context. So you can learn more and sign up for free by clicking up here or down the description below. All right, have you ever heard of this actor? So in the US and the UK, we have many Irish names, as is this actor's first name. So how do you think that we would pronounce this? Now let's take a look at how some learners often mispronounce this one.
Sean Penn.
Champagne.
Sin Pin.
Sean Penn.
Sean Penn.
Sean Penn.
All right, so as I said, this is an Irish name, and when we see Irish names, they are not pronounced anything like the way they are spelled. So his first name, we would not say Sean or Sean, we actually add in some extra sounds there. So it's pronounced Sean, Sean. Now you can actually think of some other people that have this name, for example, Shawn Mendes, who spells it more like it sounds. So if that helps you at all, you can just think that these are 2 different spellings of the exact same name. And by the way, this sound is an ah sound, not an o or an ah. So make sure that you're really opening up your mouth with that one. The same way that in the United States we would say dog, or how I say often, aw yeah. So it's not oh yeah, it's aw yeah. Now we absolutely love this comedian because we've done a lot of different lessons with her talk show. Now she has a really difficult last name. How do you think we would pronounce this? Now let's take a look at how some people pronounce this one.
Ellen DeGeneres.
Ellen DeGeneres.
Ellen DeGeneres.
Ellen DeGeneres.
Ellen DeGeneres.
All right, so first let's take a look at the first name, which is easier. So it's got 2 short E sounds. So it's not Ellen or Ellen, it's Ellen. So those short E sounds are eh, eh. Now that can be kind of difficult if you don't have that in your language, so be sure to practice that one a lot. Ellen. And then her last name, which is really tricky. Now, maybe if you're French, you might want to pronounce this like it would be in French, but we would actually say this DeGeneres. DeGeneres. So that has 2 schwas and 2 short e's, just like her first name. Now that schwa is that sound, and then the short e that we saw before in her first name is eh. So it's DeGeneres. Next, how would you say this actor's name who played the Joker? Now let's take a look at how some other learners pronounce this.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Now this one is probably really difficult for you because there's so many strange letters in here when you actually hear the way that we pronounce it. So it's Joaquin, Joaquin. Now a good way to remember this is that it sounds like the verb walking. But the difference here is that that NG is a bit of a nasal sound in walking, and the N at the end of Joaquin, the name, would be just a regular N, so it's not as nasal. It's actually got a tap at the top of the mouth, whereas the tongue is neutral when you say the verb. So Joaquin, walking. And then his last name also has some sounds in there that you might have not expected. So do you know how we pronounce that PH first of all? You've probably seen this in other words. Now we pronounce that as an F. So we actually say this Phoenix. Now this one is really tricky because there's a silent O in that name. No, we don't say that O at all. It's just Phoenix. And you can actually remember this because it's a real word, it's a mythological bird, and it's also the capital of the state of Arizona, so Phoenix, Arizona. And if you love this actor, then you're definitely going to want to check out the lesson that we made with the movie Joker. You can check that out in the description below. Alright, this actor has a super fun name to say, but I would bet that it's going to be a little bit tricky for you to say correctly. Now, how would you say his name? Let's take a look at how some other learners think it's pronounced.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Now, Benedict is kind of an old name. It's not so common nowadays. There is a really famous plate that I love for breakfast when I'm in the United States, and maybe you've had it before. It's called Eggs Benedict. So that's a really good way to remember this. So it's Benedict. So it's not A sounds like you might think seeing those E's in there. It's actually an E and a schwa. So it's Benedict. Benedict. And then his last name is actually easier than it looks. So first we have cum, so that's got that that schwa sound, Cumber, and that's probably a little bit tricky, probably the most difficult part of that name because of the R sound. So Cumberbatch. And then that last thing is like a batch of cookies. It's like a group of things. You would bake a batch of cookies. So altogether, Cumberbatch, Cumberbatch. Now, he's British, so the more correct way to say this would be like Andrea would say it. So I would say Benedict Cumberbatch, and she would say,
I call him Benedict Cumberbatch.
All right, so the big difference there again is that R sound. Okay, so we only have 2 names left, but I wanted to let you know that after you finish this lesson, I would highly recommend that you watch this other lesson that I made that teaches you all about connected speech. Now, this really is the secret to being able to understand natives when we speak fast. So you'll be able to find that by clicking up here or down the description below after you finish this lesson. Now let's take a look at the actress who played Black Widow. How do you think you would say her name? Let's take a look at how some other learners think that this is pronounced.
Scarlett Johansson.
Scarlett Johansson.
Scarlett Johansson.
Scarlett Johansson.
Scarlett Johansson.
So the first name is pretty easy. It's Scarlett. Scarlett. So make sure you're saying Scarlett and not Scarlett. It's a short I sound. Scarlett. And then the more tricky thing that people usually mispronounce is her last name. So it's Johansson. Johansson. You should just say one of those S's there, and then what a lot of people mispronounce here is the J. So this actually comes probably from some Scandinavian language where the J would be pronounced as a Y. So that would actually probably be more correct, saying Johansson. But she says it as an American would. So she says that J as J, Johansson. And if you love this actress, then you'll definitely want to check out the lesson that we made with her movie called Lucy. You'll find that linked down in the description below. Okay, let's take a look now at an Australian actor. How would you say his name? Let's take a look at what some other learners thought.
Chris Hemsworth.
Chris Hemsworth.
Chris Hemsworth.
Chris Hemsworth.
Chris Hemsworth.
All right, so his first name is really common, Chris. You probably have this even in your own language or some variation of it. So it's Chris, you just ignore that CH and just say it as a C. However, his last name is a lot more tricky. It's actually just 2 syllables, so it won't be so bad for you to practice. The first syllable is easier, so it's Hems. You just need to make sure that you're pronouncing that H, and that S is actually pronounced as a Z, so Hems. But then the next one is a lot trickier. It's actually said like the word worth, like how much is this worth? What's the value of something? And so that's a word that you might actually have to use sometimes, so it's worthwhile practicing this. So it's really tricky because it's got a W, it's got an R, it's got a TH, which might not exist in your language. So make sure that you're saying that W as a W, not a V, and make sure that you're pronouncing the R correctly. So worth, and altogether, Hemsworth. Now this is another one that because of that R, Andrea would probably say a little bit differently. So how would you say that, Andrea?
I would say Chris Hemsworth.
And last but not least, we have an actor that I'm sure you've seen in plenty of movies. How would you say his name?
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey. Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey.
So this is probably the hardest name on this list. Both his first name and last name are pretty tricky. So his first name, we would actually say Matthew. So it has two T's, but we only pronounce a TH sound there. Math, like if you study math, Matthew. Now let's switch over to his last name. So first off, we have this MC. Now that actually comes from Irish, and it's really common in Irish names, which as I said before, we have a lot of in the United States. So we would actually say that as Mick. But then in the case of Matthew's name, we have another C coming after the Mick. So we actually link those together and just say one C. So it becomes Mika. So make sure you're not saying Mika or Miko, it's Mi-ka. And then in that syllable na, the GH is actually silent. So this is kind of like in the word thought. We just say na. And then finally, hey. So all together, McConaughey, McConaughey. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks so much for joining me today. And remember that if you've had fun with this, you can get 3 more names over on our Instagram. So be sure to head over there and learn about those. And I want to hear from you. Which of these names did you find most difficult? Or did I miss any names that you find super challenging? Tell me down in the comments below. And now it's time to go beyond the classroom and live your English. Aw, yeah. What's up, guys? Today I'm going to be teaching you how to correctly pronounce brand names in English. Now, why does it even matter anyways to be able to pronounce brand names correctly? Because they're not real words, right? Well, in fact, brand names are all around us. I'm sure today you've already come in contact or even had to say some sort of different brand name. Like right here, for example, on my shirt, I have a brand